If you read what's out of the New York Times, it's such a dishonest newspaper. It's such garbage. Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CBE.
Thank you, President. A select group of DC-based journalists should no longer have a monopoly over the privilege of press access at the White House.
This is going to be great television, I will say that.
The executive producer of CBS News' 60 Minutes, resigning from the long-running Sunday news program, saying that he has lost his journalistic independence.
Very good morning to you. Hi, good morning. My name's John Sopel. I co-host the News Agents podcast. With me, four absolute titans of the journalism industry. Joe Kahn, who's the executive editor of the New York Times, which picked up just the 4 Pulitzer Prizes in the past few days. Congratulations on that. Ali, who you've just met and heard from. Anand, Giridharadas, who runs the hugely successful newsletter, The Ink. And last but not least, Brian Stelter from CNN, who kept me sane all the years that I was living in America and making sense of the media landscape for me. And Brian, if I can start with you. Trump 1.0, I felt that the media often either set itself up as the chief cheerleader for Trump or the opposition to Donald Trump. And as a sort of BBC journalist at the time, I kind of thought, oh, this is very uncomfortable, hearing news anchors calling Trump a disgrace and an embarrassment and all the rest of it. But this time round, it feels a very different landscape, with a lot of media companies looking like they're trying to sue for peace with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump even more aggressive.
In part, it's because the audience has changed. The audience fragmenting in ways that had not happened 10 years ago. That's partly because of Trump's attack. Oh, that's good. There we go. Okay, we'll try that again. I was starting to talk about the audience. Yes, we'll talk about the press fighting or folding. But the audience has changed in ways that weren't true 10 years ago. Donald Trump's lies about the media have seeped into the minds and the hearts of tens of millions of people, right? And they've opted out of what we consider legacy media. At the same time, there are many liberals, progressives, anti-Trump Republicans who are ticked off at the press right now for other reasons. There are all of those sorts of emotions and reactions to news coverage that I think are affecting the dialogue we're about to have. The word fight makes me uncomfortable inherently, right? We're talking about fight or fold. I don't view myself as a fighter. Right. I don't think most reporters who are covering politics or media think they're in the middle of a fight. And yet, as Marty Baron famously said, we're not at war, we're at work. If one side's at war and the other side is not at war, the other side loses, right? A pacifist always loses in a war. And so there is this incredibly difficult dynamic the press is in, because this time it's not just words from Trump, it's actions. And so I wrote down 2 thoughts to start the conversation while I was watching that video. The first was that sometimes fighting and folding are happening in the very same place. At CBS right now, some are fighting, others are folding. It's happening in the exact same house. And number 2, for every outlet that does fold, others are going to fight. In fact, sometimes when you fold, some of those folks leave, they cross the street, and they start fighting somewhere else. And they launch their own startups and Substacks and new operations. That is the big difference, I think, from 2017, from the first time around.
Just follow up on that very briefly. The thing that sort of struck me was, 2017 people were taking the knee. It feels like now they're bending the knee. Do you think that characterization is oversimplistic in the sense that you hear about what's happening at 60 Minutes, the kind of ABC suing for peace over a very contentious, libel case that Donald Trump brought, etc.
I think it's overly simplistic because 60 Minutes is publishing award-winning journalism every Sunday. Sunday, including about the Trump administration. The work is still being done, although there are some owners, not all owners, some owners who are trying to figure out a path forward that seems like appeasement. Look, I've also had other media CEOs comment that Jeff Bezos is going to regret showing up to the inauguration. I think it all started with that Trump ABC settlement on December 14th. That was the tell. That's where we were heading. But even Disney's ABC is out there every day trying to cover the Trump administration. And Terry Moran interrogated the president last week in the Oval Office. So the work is being done. Is it reaching the audiences it should reach? I think that's a different question.
Okay, well, and we're going to come to Terry Moran in just a minute. But Joe, let me come to you. What about the pressures at the New York Times? Do you feel it's very different this time round from last time? Because no one could accuse the New York Times of being one of those who are kind of, bending the knee, of kind of collapsing under the pressure of Donald Trump.
Yeah, the pressures are. Some of the pressures are what was described earlier from the Justice Department seeking pretty actively to erode the freedoms for the media to do its job, essentially, and put individual reporters under threat, and potentially to remove kind of legal barriers to including reporters in investigations. Those are real, and they happen to good reporters on the job regardless of the stance of their owners. There's also, of course, as you were talking about, the sort of, the sense of kind of accommodation or even capitulation by some owners. You put those things together, and it is a tougher environment than it was 10 years ago at the dawn of Donald Trump. Yes.
Do you feel those pressures?
The New York Times is in a particularly advantageous position at the moment, to be honest. We always talk about the word independence. We're an independent media organization. There are many independent media organizations, but we are genuinely independent. We don't have a parent company that has extended interest, that needs M&A approval, that needs broadcast regulatory approval. We don't have billionaire owners with lots of other interests that Donald Trump might find a way to interfere with. We don't get any revenue from the government, literally no revenue from the government. We don't get any advertising revenue. We no longer, under Donald Trump, get $1 of subscription revenue directly from government agencies. We get nothing. So they have no levers to pull on us, and we have family ownership that is determined to pursue the mission of the newsroom as its first and foremost duty of a family trust. We're in a very advantageous position institutionally.
I just want to follow up very briefly on the psychodrama with Donald Trump, because for all that he rails and rants at the New York Times, he loves you and seeks your approval the whole time. And there was the famous A.G. Sulzberger dinner that he had in the first term with Trump, where he was just saying, can't you be nice to me? Why can't you like me?
Why can't I get one good article in my hometown newspaper? Yeah. Which of course, there are many articles, and some of which actually he likes. And if you have the chance to visit Mar-a-Lago, you will see the New York Times spread out on the coffee tables there. He still values, I think, kind of what he considers sort of the paper of record. But at the same time, as you heard in that video, we're a constant source of attack as well.
Yeah. Alessandra, just the challenges for being an agency wire service, obviously much more than that. But there you are. You've got clients all over the world who depend on impartial information. We've seen the trouble that AP got into for refusing to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. What does it feel like to be told you can't be part of this news information service, which you would say, we don't have a dog in the fight, we just want to tell the truth in this climate?
Yeah, well, first of all, we haven't, in a sense, we haven't been excluded from anything. What has happened is that the pool has expanded. So the news organizations that are now allowed into certain situations in the White House or on in Air Force One has expanded to about 30 news organizations, whereas we, especially as news agencies, had a privileged position beforehand. So now, for example, on Air Force One, if the numbers all work out, we'd be on about once every 30 times. So it's just the pool have expanded. Now, we as a news agency hold a particular role in the news ecosystem, right? Because we provide news to every other news organization in the world. And it is not easy for others to do that. So already we're beginning to see, that some news organizations, for example, are sort of saying, well, we actually don't have the money to pay to be on Air Force One. Let's let the news agencies do it and we'll get it anyway. So we're going to have to see how that actually shapes up. But then I would say, the second thing I would say is this is, being in the press room is important, of course, because you want to tell the world what is going on inside the institutions of power. But sourcing and discovering news is even more important. And so we can continue, all of us can continue, those of us who are in or out, continue doing our job by having good sources, by reporting out what's going on in the White House, in the Pentagon, and so on and so forth. So this is not woe is me. This is just, we're going to have to figure out how we can do how we can be in the room and report what's in the room, but we have to continue our job of actually digging and reporting and finding sources to tell the world what's going on.
I just think it's worth explaining because who travels on Air Force One seems so insignificant, but actually it really matters because you're not working for your news organisation when you are there. You are working for all radio outlets, for all TV outlets, for all wire services. And what the White House has done this time round is said, it's not going to be the correspondents, the White House Correspondents Association, who will decide who is part of the pool. It will be the White House. The White House will determine. And so when you saw that big bust-up with Zelensky, it started when the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was part of the pool that day, the White House selected pool, started going at Zelensky about the clothes he was wearing. And that's where it all turned sour. And that is the White House exercising control in a very major way that previously they didn't, certainly in the first term. And so I would be on the radio seat on Air Force One. There are only 12 places on Air Force One for journalists. And, it was a rotation that the White House Correspondents Association organised. So it's a real exercise of control. Anand, you were with the New York Times for over a decade. You still do some work with MSNBC. But you've become a very successful independent journalist, kind of operating free of maybe the shackles of corporations. Does that mean that this is where we should look to for the kind of innovative, investigative journalism that will hold the administration to account?
I think it's one piece of a puzzle, but I would begin, and it's an honor to be here with you all in the city that I'm going to move to if it gets really bad.
Give you some restaurants.
Yeah, and bunkers. I would start with the following paradox, whether it's independent, whether it's the New York Times, whether it's television. I think our profession is doing some of the best work it has ever done. And in the eyes of the people we serve, we are failing them a lot of the time. And I think that's painful, whether you're independent like me or you run a very big publication. I think it's a painful truth that we sit with right now. Before we even get to the answers or the diagnoses, we are as trusted as political parties that people hate, as governments that people don't trust to help them anymore. It is an age of distrust in general, but given the risks that people take every day in our profession, given the fact that their bodies and lives are on the line, given the dogged work for low pay, holding people like Donald Trump and others to account, the fact that we are not trusted by most people in most places is an enormous problem. And so I look at it as, it's a problem with different flavors. I think when you look at some of the best publications we have, elite media that does the most rigorous work, I think there is a problem of the traditional forms we work with, the forms I was trained in the New York Times, not being made for an authoritarian frontally waging war against that form, right? The form where when I was learning to write news articles, you'd kind of say something but the editor would call you and say, can you find someone else to say that, right? Where authority was always had to be kind of distributed to attributions to this person, that person. There are elements of the old form of how we tell the news that simply do not work anymore, and we cling to them. And I think a lot of these organizations know it because they're creating great experiments in their own publications that are different. So right in the New York Times, the morning newsletter, it's still news, but it has a completely different relationship to, I'm just going to tell you what this situation is, and I'm going to claim the authority that I legitimately have earned as a journalist. I think then on TV channels, you have this other problem of entanglements, right? In the media where you do have the Ink, my newsletter, will never own an amusement park. I'm going to be very clear on this.
You sure? You promised.
I declare this here in London. Once you have amusement parks, as Joe was saying, you have M&A deals that need happening. This entanglement problem for a lot of these corporate conglomerates is an enormous problem because it turns out you cannot be brave if you have a whole bunch of things. And then I would say on the independent side, it's great. I think it's very powerful. It's incredible to have a relationship with your readers, but we don't want an archipelago of paywalled mini content is not adequate on its own to dealing with something like Trumpism or just covering the country. And there's a problem of audience capture, right? When you have that intimate connection of a newsletter, I may not want to let you down. I am limited in how much I can push you, right? And so there are going to be new problems with the Substack model also, and we need to think about all of those together.
Okay, well, let's look at a specific example of the problem we're dealing with Donald Trump, and I want to play a clip from that you were referencing, Brian, a moment ago, that Terry Moran did with Trump for ABC News, where Trump is insisting that the man from Maryland who got sent to El Salvador and shouldn't have been because he had a protection order to stay in the United States was a member of MS-13. There was proof of it because he had MS-13 on his knuckles, which was photoshopped. Let's have a look.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshopped. So let me
That was Photoshopped. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry. But you're not being very nice.
I mean, how do you deal with it, Brian? What should have the response have been?
I'd heard of Terry. I can't believe he hadn't heard of Terry Moran.
Yeah.
Terry Moran was probably the one in the room because Trump wouldn't sit down with George Stephanopoulos or the evening anchor David Muir, and so he will end up finding people to interview him. But if he ends up going to legacy media, he's going to face reality in those moments, and his lies will be confronted. I find it striking in the first few months of the Trump second term, his approval ratings have only moved in one direction. The information, the news coverage is still seeping through to many Americans. And that's why I find myself weirdly bullish in this conversation. Even though the threats are real, even though the fight versus full dynamic is real, the news coverage still matters. It still matters clearly. Those interview clips still matter. Now, do I expect that if Trump's approval ratings continue to decline, will he become even more antagonistic? Will his government take even further steps against the press? Yes, I do. But we already see pretty clearly how this is going to work. There are many, many, many Americans dissatisfied with the status quo who re-elected Trump, who want to see him improve the standing of the country. So many of my neighbors who voted for Trump have grand hopes and dreams attached to that vote. But so far, they're not seeing it. And they know he's lying about the gas prices, right? They know deep down inside that he's lying about the gas prices. So that kind of reality is still, it still matters. And I find a little bit of optimism in that, Joe, regardless of party.
Yeah, Joe, do you think there is a problem? I mean, when I was covering Trump every night on the 10 o'clock news for the BBC, you can't go on every night and say, liar, liar, pants on fire, without people just thinking, oh, God, I've heard that yesterday. We have to differentiate when it's a kind of really serious, big, egregious movement from the truth and when, it's just Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Brian on the point that there's still a lot of good reporting that breaks through even in this environment, and that's what we need to double and triple down on is just good reporting. I mean, we can talk all day about what terms to use, what labels to use, how to confront him on a live interview. What really matters at the end of the day is just having good, well-sourced beat reporters who break stories, who dig deeply behind the stories. I mean, even being in the White House pool, it's important we're also in the White House pool. At the moment, we would really like if Reuters and AP would be restored to their privileged position in the White House pool, because it's hard work. You're traveling around with the president. You're doing a bunch of kind of spot reporting for everybody else. And expert wire reporters are really good at that. What I think we need more of are beat reporters who are well-sourced, who are going deeper behind the story, who are doing accountability journalism on all this stuff, and who are breaking stories, breaking news. And those things still break through. I mean, we had an incident with Elon Musk prepared to go to the Pentagon to get a briefing from Pete Hegseth and what's called the tank inside the Pentagon. Elon Musk was interested in learning more about the U.S. plans for future war engagement with China. He's also a huge foreign investor in China. He's not a government official. He doesn't have the proper security clearances. We reported on that before it happened. It was denounced as fake news, but it wasn't fake news. It was real. And the briefing didn't happen. Donald Trump read about the planned briefing in the New York Times, and he stopped it from happening. So, even in real time, even with this administration, if you break stories that matter, they can still break through. They can even still break through in some occasions to the president himself, who can learn things about his own officials, his own administration from the press. So just keep focusing on good reporting, keep breaking stories. Those things, in my view, will break through. I share the optimism on that.
Can I add a line, which is have the beat reporters and then have their backs? The Times has been very strong about standing up when there are unfair attacks against the reporting, or last week when Trump threatened to sue the Times over accurately describing a different lawsuit. Immediately responding, standing up strong, not backing down to that.
Alessandra, what conversations are you having with the White House? I mean, are they listening? Do they understand the importance of wire service for the dissemination of information around the world? Because I tell you what, it sometimes feels like that the White House is its own media company, pushing out memes, pushing out stuff. And, the way that stuff is going out on the White House official account, it feels like, everything we do on our podcast now of trying to get stuff out onto social media, onto different platforms, is exactly what the White House is doing.
Well, first of all, to respond to your question more broadly, I agree with the three of you on a few points, which is that, and it does get to your question, but that this is not a fight. Our responsibility is to our audience. Our audience wants news. They don't want to fight, right? And they don't want it to be about us. They want information, they want news, they want insight, they want analysis, right? The moment we make it about us versus the White House or us versus anybody else, then we are doing them a disservice. And so that speaks to your question. Of course, I mean, we try to explain to any government around the world what the role of a news agency is. We do that all the time, and how important it is to propagate news to clients and to all of our audiences. So we do that, but we do that in the U.S. like we do that in any other country in the world. Disintermediation has been happening for a long time. So the fact that the White House goes on social media, that happens that's been happening for years, and that happens everywhere. Our role, if we're not in the room and we can't do it directly, is then to say, this was said, X was said, the numbers show Y, or it's not as simple as this, or it was red and instead it's blue, or whatever it is. But it's not that different. And again, there is a certain end to American exceptionalism here, okay? And I think that what we're seeing in the US, we as Reuters, we operate in more than 100 countries, we see it in many countries around the world. So this is a playbook that we have seen and that we use around the world. So I don't want to diminish what's happening in the US because, leader of the free world, we didn't have to. But I also, to Joe's point, journalists can still do their job and do it every day in the U.S. very successfully. And yes, we will continue to tell the White House why news agencies are important, but there are many other ways to get to what is going on. And that is our responsibility, is to our audiences. It is not we're not here to fight. We're not here to make it about ourselves, because many studies have shown that when journalists make it about themselves and make it, and sort of air their dirty laundry, that diminishes trust, to your point.
Anand, I want to come back to you because you made the pledge to this audience, which we're going to hold you to, about not owning an amusement park. But I just want to play you a clip of Scott Pelley. He's the long-standing reporter on 60 Minutes and previously was an anchor for CBS as well, talking about the problems of ownership at CBS by Paramount.
Our parent company, Paramount, is trying to complete a merger. The Trump administration must approve it. Paramount began to supervise our content in new ways. None of our stories has been blocked, but Bill felt he lost the independence that honest journalism requires.
Anand, you spoke about the problem of corporates owning, but are you going to get the investment? You talked about the archipelago of Substacks as not being a sufficient way. Is there a way through this?
I think what it is not sufficient for is the kind of investigative resources that the two of you could deploy and lose a ton of money on for the social good, right? I don't think the new world of independent media is going to do that. I don't think it can, even cover a president in the same way with, 8 people on doing one story in a day, those kinds of things. I think that where independent media and newsletters in particular and podcasts are making a huge dent is in what I would call meaning making. And what I mean by that is there's sort of what happened yesterday or what happened this week. And then there's this kind of secondary process that needs to happen in the human brain and in the collective brain, which is, what's the meaning of that thing, right? Not what are the new incremental facts that we found out, which is important. You can't start without that. But are we living under authoritarianism, for example? That's not a fact that's going to just be in the first paragraph. That's something you have to figure out, a public has to figure out. And that meaning-making process, I think, the independent world has become much more effective at helping people with that meaning-making. And the reason it's important, and I don't think the newsletter world has cracked this, I think podcasts have done better at the following. I think we have a giant problem across our democracies of our institutions not participating in meaning-making for working-class people in particular over the last generation. So as trade with China was happening and all these jobs were going away, as diversity was increasing in our societies and people were having to live and deal with people they didn't grow up dealing with, I don't think that we were having a conversation in elite publications or even wire services or even TV that just wasn't reaching like the bottom 60 to 80% of people. And so you can have the news out there, you can have a fantastic piece of reporting out there, but are you participating in the meaning making by which 80% of people figure out, why am I going to these trainings at work? Why do I have to go to news sensitivity trainings at work, right? And if you are not helping people make that meaning, you are leaving demagogues to give them explanations. And I think we need to do a better job of being in that space of meaning making.
Joe, do you recognise that criticism of kind of, I hate using the phrase mainstream media, but established news organisations, that they are elite, they are out of touch? It's part of the reason that Brexit happened in Britain, it's part of the reason that Trump happened in America.
Yeah. Look, none of our organizations individually reach a majority of people most of the time. I think that's really true. I don't know that any Substack will also reach, they're all going to have their dedicated audiences. And, as Brian was describing, there's ecosystems of media consumption in the US now that have become much more polarized, much more siloed before. Inevitably, we do have that issue. We've tried to take it upon ourselves to reach as many more people as we possibly can. Anand was talking earlier.
Do you know what your Republican readership is?
Not exactly, because we don't poll our readers. There's a widespread assumption that our audience skews left, but the truth is we have a lot of evidence that we have, large number of readers and subscribers in red states and even in the reddest counties in the United States, and that we can do journalism that reaches them both in text, in newsletter form, and increasingly in video form, when it's done in a way that travels well on social media, and that people will react to news and information that's relevant to them when it's presented in the form that they want to consume it. When they understand who the journalist is, we're trying to put our journalists more front and center. The people actually doing the hard reporting and thinking through the issues are part of the story and telling the story. We're speaking in more conversational language that kind of opens the issues up directly to people. As Anand said, moving away from the inverted pyramid of the old newspaper story into a form of journalism that speaks more directly to what people need to know. So I think we're reaching more people. I think we can reach a lot more than that. But it's absolutely true that there are ecosystems and silos that are hard to break through.
Look, we've got 4.5 minutes left, and I want to ask this final question to all of you, because I've been told that evil things will happen to me if I overrun my time, and the fear of Tina is sufficient that I'm going to stick to it. Do we do too much reporting on Donald Trump? I'll just give you an example of the past weekend. We have had Donald Trump talking about himself as Pope, reopening Alcatraz, tariffs on films, Harvard spending cuts, won't seek a third term, doesn't know whether he needs to obey the Constitution, the NFL draft will happen in Washington, D.C., illegal immigrants will be given $1,000 to go home, etc., etc., etc.
Those all sound pretty important to me.
Yeah, but do we get attention deficit disorder by the fact that a big story will break in the New York Times, and 10 minutes later we're looking at something on MSNBC of something, and we're looking in a million, because there are so many shiny objects being thrown out all the time.
There are, but that's why we need the meaning making. That's the phrase I'm going to take away from this, that we need more of that meaning making. At CNN, every anchor and correspondent is an online content creator. We just historically haven't thought of ourselves that way. And I take some responsibility for that. 10 years ago, I should have been pressing to be more present on YouTube instead of, having these amateurs who do not have journalism training, but who have launched YouTube channels and become stars online, who they call themselves content creators, but they don't have the news background. We're going to see in the next few years our news professionals try to claim that space and do more of the meaning making. I think that meaning making is the antidote to the news fatigue we feel. One final thought, though, as we talk about fight versus fold, our job is not to fight, it's to gather facts. And yet the function of gathering facts is inherently a threat to some of the people in power. And we have to constantly recognize that and try to explain to the audience what they're doing, what the approach is, what the autocratic playbook is. If we can do that in a conversational, accessible way, I think we actually gain trust.
Alessandra.
Well, first of all, just a quick note on your point. All of our money that is spent, every single cent that is spent on investigative journalism is well spent, not wasted, since I have my president, my CEO, and my own. I do not think we're doing too much on Donald Trump. He is remaking the world order. He is remaking the world economic order, world trade order, world geopolitical order. And so we have to cover it. It is really important. But I just want to make a final point. This is a moment where we really have to go back to the future. We have to go back to the future to the set of rules that underpins our trade, and that means we have to report fairly, we have to seek fair comment, we have to make sure that we're airtight, we have to think about the ethical underpinnings of what we do, and we have to do our trade well. And that is really, really important, and that is the way that I think we will emerge from this sort of morass that we've been talking about.
Joe?
The President of the United States, for us, for many media organizations, will always be able to make news. You just have to face that reality. Nobody's going to make the decision to stop covering, Donald Trump. Deporting people to Libya is the latest initiative today. That's a story. It's real. It's a threat. We're going to cover it. There are days in which I think on average we're doing a Donald Trump story every 30 minutes, 24 hours a day. That's a real statistic, and we're going to keep covering it. The way we package it, the way we track it, and our continued investment in other stories. Alessandra just talked about the Reuters Pulitzer for the fentanyl trade. Our Pulitzers were for reconstructing the American failure in Afghanistan, not much to do with Donald Trump. for going deep on the civil war in Sudan, which we think is getting insufficient coverage around the world. Not much to do with Donald Trump. We had one Pulitzer that did, which was Doug Mills taking a picture of the bullet that nearly killed him. And that won the Pulitzer for breaking news photography. But out of 4, only one was a Donald Trump. We're still invested in a lot of other stuff too. And you have to give your readers that. You have to that's really kind of the core ballast that shows we're still covering the rest of the world.
Anand, last word.
Libya is beautiful in the summertime, by the way. So, I think when you gave that list of just the week, right?
The weekend, actually.
The weekend, wow. I agree with everybody that you can't not cover things, right? And those incremental facts that were not known, that become known, need to be shared with people. I think there's a profound question of packaging and framing and even putting some of those things together. So when I was hearing you go down the list, the first thing that came into my mind, if I had to do one story, and the New York Times is not going to do one story and all those things, but you could do one story to say, as economic pain from his policies begins to kind of descend on Americans, the president spent the weekend dangling a bunch of shiny objects. I think that's a essentially fact-based observation. It's a little more, it has more of the meaning-making in it. Right. But New York Times reporters or Reuters reporters have the context and understanding to know that that's how politics works. They know these people, they go to off-the-record things. Share with us. The last quick sentence, if I could just say one sentence. We need to show our work as a profession. A lot of the public has no idea what reporters actually do, right? And I go to parties all the time with sophisticated people who actually don't know what we mean when we say reporting. We need to share our work with the public, show our process, and I think that's part of rebuilding trust.
Look, all of you, thank you for the most fascinating session. We could have gone on, but to Brian, to Anand, to Ali, Joe, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Goodbye.